In this video, we're gonna take the RitFit Power Rack and Cable Crossover combo, and we're gonna compare it against the Lionscool Power Rack and Cable Crossover combo. A couple of notes before we get into the video. Both of these were provided for free for review. I have reviews for each of these already on the channel if you want to check out their individual reviews. But let's compare these head to head to see which one is the king of the budget racks. And if you have a rack that you want to see me compare against these, let me know and I'll see if I can get my hands on it. Let's get into it. And I have used these side by side. I've used them in the same workout and jumped back and forth from one machine to the other. And I've nitpicked just about every difference that I could possibly find when it comes to these two racks. So hopping into it, one of the obvious ones is the uprights are a little bit different. That's because the RitFit rack is a true 2x2 inch upright, whereas the Lionscool rack over here is actually a 6 centimeter by 6 centimeter upright, which is about 2.5 inches by 2.5 inches. And that matters if you plan to add a bunch of attachments in the future, because 2x2 is a more standard size than 6 centimeter by 6 centimeter. So you're gonna have a little bit easier of a time finding attachments when it comes to the RitFit. And while the RitFit rack does win from the perspective of being a true 2x2 rack and winning for the expandability perspective, it turns right back around and loses to the Lionscool from the perspective of the number of holes on the upright. The holes are 4.25 inches apart on the RitFit rack. They're only 2.5 inches apart on the Lionscool rack. That might not sound like a lot, but it does make a difference. And I actually did have a hard time finding a sweet spot on the RitFit rack for bench press. When I first guessed as to where I wanted it and put the J-cups in there, when I went to re-rack my first set, I actually racked it over the J-cups and hit the uprights. And so then I adjusted it up 1 notch, but then when I adjusted it up 1 notch, it was actually a little bit too high, and I kind of had to shrug my shoulders forward to get enough height to get the bar over the lip of the J-cups. So it was a little bit harder to find the sweet spot, at least for me personally. And another small thing to keep in mind is that there's no numbering of any kind on the RitFit upright. The Lionscool upright on the inside of the rack has numbers every 5 holes for the J-cups, and then on the outside of the rack, there's numbering for every single hole for the cable handles. And next, let's talk about the cable system. They're very, very similar, but there are some differences. When it comes to the way that the RitFit adjusts, I actually like this one just a little bit better. It's easier to operate with one hand because it has this little tighten down pop pin. So you just give it a couple twists, pull it, and then it easily slides up and down. Give it a couple twists to lock it back down. Whereas if we go all the way over here on the Lionscool rack, it's a little bit harder to see this one because there's a post in the way. If we go all the way over here to this side, you have a handle that comes out of the side here, and you give it a pull, and it's intended for you to be able to do one-hand operation because you have the handle, you pull the pin, and then you can slide it. But in reality, it actually doesn't work one-handed even though you have that handle, because I find that when you push up, it wants to lean and it doesn't easily adjust upwards. So you end up having to push up and adjust it. So it's still a 2-hand operation. And an actual consequence of having this handle here, it's great if it were a standalone functional trainer, but it's not a standalone functional trainer. It's a power rack, which means there's a bar on it. And then you have to load plates onto a bar. And if you have this lowered down just enough to where you can, squat inside the rack and put your bar right here, then you actually run into a problem that I wasn't expecting. I went to put my plates on and boom, it hits the handle. And so you have to have these completely out of the way to be able to load the plates on. And again, it's not a huge deal because it's just a matter of lowering it down a little bit lower than you otherwise would have. It only takes a few seconds. But if you forget and then you hit it with the plate and then you're like, ah, crap, I forgot, and then you have to adjust it and then you slide the plate the rest of the way on there, it could be mildly annoying. Not a deal breaker, but definitely worth noting. And so there's one difference where I like the RitFit better, but there's another difference when it comes to the cables where I like the Lionscool better, because on the RitFit rack, there's 8.5 inches of loadable space on each weight horn for the weight trolley here. On the Lionscool, on the other hand, there's actually 12 inches of loadable space on those two weight horns. And so you can put more plates on the cable trolley on the Lionscool than you can on the RitFit. And it's not as big of a deal if you're using steel plates, because 8.5 inches if you're using steel plates, that's still a lot of plate. But if you're using bumper plates, I was only able to put on 270 pounds on the RitFit rack, and I actually had it completely maxed out, and it was no challenge for me to do two-handed exercises because there just wasn't enough weight on there. Whereas the extra 3.5 inches that you have over here could be the difference between getting another plate on there. And the way the cables terminate and the way the pulleys are set up is slightly different when it comes to each of these. You can see on the Lionscool, it has that rounded plate, whereas on the RitFit over here, it actually has this kind of divoted part in the middle. I like that divoted part in the middle because it gives like a natural seat for the cable to sit down into, versus when you let your cable go on this one, especially if you're doing an exercise where you're pulling up or you're pulling down, you know, you're not pulling directly outward, it's gonna hit that plate and then it kind of like grinds around to the stopping point. And I've actually scratched a little bit of paint off of that plate already. And again, that's another small thing, but it's a place where the RitFit has an option that I like a little bit better than this one. And then going back in the other direction, you're probably noticing that these things are stacking up pretty evenly. On the other hand, we'll swing the pendulum in the other direction. I do like the way the cables terminate on the Lionscool more so than I like the RitFit. You can see it has this nice like plastic housing where the carabiner goes inside of that termination. Whereas if we go over here on this one, we just have this clip where there's a bolt sticking out and could potentially, you know, scratch you a little bit. I wouldn't necessarily see this being an issue except for maybe on cable crossovers. That might be potentially an issue for you. Another thing that it's a difference, so I'll point it out, but it's a very, very small difference. At the bottom of the weight tree, there's just a little rubber stopper at the bottom on this one, whereas on the Lionscool, there's actually a little rubber stopper and a spring to absorb some of the shock. I don't know that that's really gonna make a whole lot of difference at all, but it's a difference. And like I said, I looked at every single thing that I could possibly find to point out differences when it comes to these two racks. And the Lionscool continues to win when it comes to the amount of holes and spacing of holes when it comes to the base of the rack. Because if you look at the band peg holes, there's only 2 holes on the RitFit rack. Whereas on the Lionscool rack, there's actually holes all the way throughout the base. So you have more versatility as to where you put your band pegs. That doesn't matter a lot to me because I very rarely use band pegs in my own training. But if you use band pegs in your training, that's definitely something that you should keep in mind. There's also a difference in the storage. I wouldn't necessarily say one of them is strictly better than the other. It's a little bit of personal preference. It's kind of a wash here, but it's just different. So on the RitFit, there is a weight horn that comes off the back of the rack and sticks out on each side, which I personally like slightly better because you have weights on each side. They both have these removable weight horns, so that's a wash there. But on the Lionscool rack, the dedicated attached storage is on one side. It comes off of one side. You put plates on the front and back. I don't like that as much, but you also have vertical bar storage. You can put your bar right here and store your bar upright. So if you're using the cables or something like that, you can get your bar completely out of the way. One thing that they have in common is they both have a smaller handle, and they're both small enough that they're useless in my opinion, especially if we look at the Lionscool one, because it's actually worse. It's so narrow that it's a very unnatural position, and I'm never actually going to use it for anything. It's basically unusable for me. Unless you're a very small person, it's probably unusable for you. The RitFit one is pretty bad, but it's not as bad. It's a little wider. You can see that it's close. If I put my hands all the way out to the very edges, it's almost shoulder width, but I'm still never going to use this handle. I've never used either of these handles and never will use either of these handles. I'm just going to use the lat pull down bar because it's wider. The landmine attachment and the foot tube for the low rows are both removable on the RitFit rack, which I really like because they can be out of the way. And I do a lot of rows, but that's only one category of movement. And so the rest of the time that I'm using the rack, it can be out of the way. And then I don't do a lot of landmine exercises, so this can just always be out of the way. Whereas on the Lionscool rack, it's attached. And so even though I don't use it very often, it's just always there. And then if you look at the foot plate on the other side, it is attached. It's always there. And it may or may not be in the way if you're bench pressing inside the rack. Depending on your foot placement, it may or may not be in the way. Or depending on how you use the rack, it may not ever be in the way. So this might not be a big deal for you, but given the choice, I would definitely want it to be removable versus it being fixed. The pull-up bars are also different. The Lionscool is the clear winner. The RitFit pull-up bar is not knurled for any of the handles, and there's also fewer handles than on the Lionscool rack. There's a wide neutral, and then there's a roughly 45-degree handle, and then that's it. Whereas on the Lionscool rack over here, you have more grip options, and you have knurled handles. So you have a wide neutral, you have a narrow neutral, you have your 45, and because of the slant, you can still do your pronated grip right here, whereas you can't do that on the RitFit rack. The RitFit is the winner when it comes to the J-Cup. I love that shape of J-Cup to where the bar automatically goes to one spot and sits, whereas I'm not as much of a fan of the flat J-Cups where you actually have to roll the bar forward before you start your exercise. So that automatically is a plus over this one. But then also this one uses UHMW plastic, whereas this one uses, I'm not really sure, to be honest. It's like I'm not really sure if it's plastic or if it's rubber. It's a rubbery feeling material, and it gets shredded away. If you have a bar that has a grippy knurling and you twist the bar before getting started with your exercise, then it kind of grips. You can see where I've twisted the bar right here, and then you can also see where I have racked the bar and it slid down the back of the J-Cup. If you have a budget barbell, which is possible if you are in the market for a budget rack, and it has passive knurling, this may not ever be an issue, but if you have an aggressive knurled bar, it's immediately going to be an issue. One of the things that I find interesting that's a difference between these two racks is you can tell by the spotters that they give you that they seem to intend for you to use the rack differently. So with the RitFit, they give you half rack front spotter arms. So that tells me that they really intend for you to do your exercises off the front of the rack rather than inside the rack. Obviously, you can do your exercises inside the rack, and you could technically put your half rack spotters backwards and have them inside the rack, but this kind of suggests to me that they either plan for you to do stuff outside the rack, or maybe that's the feedback that they've gotten, that more people prefer to go off the front of the rack when it comes to this kind of rack. Whereas Lionscool, on the other hand, they give you an internal safety. So it seems to suggest to me that they intend for you to use the inside of the rack when you're doing all of your main lift. And I'm not necessarily saying one of those is better than the other. It's just something for you to consider for how you plan to use your rack and which of these spotters would be the better option for you. And the final area where the Lionscool rack is the winner is there's just a few extra things that you get with this rack that you don't get on the RitFit. First of all, you get a T-bar handle, which you don't get with the RitFit. You get dip arms on the Lionscool, again, absent on the RitFit. And then you also have hooks to hang accessories on the back of the rack with the Lionscool that are absent on the RitFit. And so just a few extra little features. This rack is $20 more than this rack, $699 versus $679. Basically the same price, but slight differences, and could, potentially account for the difference in things that you get with this one versus the other, but basically the same price. Now for the question that you've all been waiting for: which of these two racks are the better rack? And to be honest, I did not even know an answer prior to starting this video. I tried my best to come up with an answer beforehand, and then ultimately decided that I was just going to give a gut response at the end of the video because I had not decided yet when I started recording. I would say my verdict is, if you plan to add accessories and you want the added availability of accessories because of having a standard size, then RitFit would be the better option. But if you don't care about that and this just already has all the things that you ever plan on using, then I think I would probably go with the Lionscool rack. But in either event, if you are on the fence and you go with one versus the other, I don't think you're gonna make a wrong decision. If somebody came to me and said, hey, I got the RitFit rack, I'm gonna be like, yeah, awesome, you're gonna love the rack. And then if somebody else immediately came up to me after that and said, hey, I got the Lionscool rack, what do you think? I'm gonna say, awesome, you're gonna love the rack. I think they're so close and also so different, but in the end, I think the pros and cons just kind of wash each other out and they end up being pretty much a tie. And the funny thing about it is, one thing I was telling Tracy as I was jumping back and forth between these two racks and looking at the difference, if you take the pros from one rack and the pros from the other rack, you could take those two, put them together, and you could come up with the ultimate budget rack for probably the same manufacturing cost. So RitFit, Lionscool, whoever's watching this video, I guess jump on it and whoever gets there first is gonna have the ultimate budget rack, in my opinion. But that's gonna be it for this one. If you have a rack you want me to check out and add to this budget competition, let me know and I'll see if I can get my hands on it. As always, God bless you and your family, and we'll see you next week. You have this teeny tiny handle here. There we go, it caught me back. All right. You have this